Hello, MCU fans. Today we're going to look at the question of whether there might be multiple possible timeline placements for the Werewolf by Night special presentation. Now, in my previous video, I gave when I thought it occurred in the MCU timeline, but in this video, let's dive in and look at a few possible locations. So, in my Werewolf by Night timeline video, I point out that the special presentation occurs as the last entry in the Disney Plus timeline. Now, we know that Ms. Marvel occurs at the beginning of her junior year and that it's in 2025 at this point, so September of 2025. In my Thor Love and Thunder video, I throw out that my feeling is that it occurs in October of 2025, and that works out really well because Werewolf by Night would make sense to be a late October Halloween timeframe special presentation. So, we also know that Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special will be coming out at the end of the year and will probably be around December of 2025. So this all seems to work pretty well. But let's look to see if there's any other clues we should be picking up from the special presentation. So first of all, we know it has to take place after the oldest date of death in the mausoleum. And the oldest that I could find was someone named Beverly, who appeared to die in 1986. So that, of course, made my original theory of the 1970s not possible, but also it couldn't be in the 1930s and 1940s, as others had also considered. So it's definitely going to be later in the timeline. And in fact, we know it has to be after the OG Avenger team up in the first Avengers movie, which took place in 2012. So no reason not to place it in the current year, 2025, of the MCU timeline. But the real clue that I missed, not only because I don't know Latin, but because I didn't take the time to translate it, is there's some good information about Ulysses' death that you miss if you don't translate this. And a huge kudos to Eric Voss of the channel New Rockstars, because he was the first that I saw that translated this. And it says, Ulysses, son of Septimus Bloodstone, was slain on the last full moon of the year, and at the end of the bloodshed. Well, I want to know what the bloodshed is, right? That sounds pretty cool. But also, isn't it interesting that he died on a full moon? Was he killed by a werewolf? Was he maybe even killed by Jack? Wouldn't that be wild? Maybe Ulysses started killing good monsters as well as bad monsters, and Jack got tired of him and killed him? Who knows, right? But anyway, the most important thing is, Ulysses died on the last full moon of the year, or of a year, right? So that's the real question. What year did he die? Well, if this special presentation is to occur in October of 2025, then he would have had to die on the last full moon of 2024, because it was the last full moon of a year that he died. So we're going to go with 2024 for the minute and play this out. If he did die on the last full moon of 2024, the lunar calendar tells us that would be December 15th of 2024. We also know from the special that the next full moon is in 5 days. So the next full moon after October 2025 is November 5th of 2025. And guess what? 5 days before that is October 31st. Could that be any more perfect, right? Surely Disney wouldn't pass this up to make it on October 31st of 2025. Well, there is one problem, though. Now that we know he died on the last full moon of the year, look at the distance in time between when he died and when the funeral was. That's 10 and a half months. I'll be honest, I didn't suspect it would be 10 and a half months since he died that they were doing this funeral. In fact, theoretically, that amount of time, his corpse would be a mess. It would have decomposed terribly. Well, the decomposition is easy to explain. The Bloodstone family was very well versed in taxidermy. They had all kinds of monsters all around the room that looked very well preserved. Now, should you taxidermy a human? Ethically speaking, that's probably not the best idea, but I'm not sure the Bloodstone family was, great in the ethics category in life. So the taxidermy would explain the corpse looking really good, relatively good, right? But then keep in mind, the corpse was animated, which would require, removing his head, removing his arms. it's somehow putting mechanicals in that reattach his arms and his head. They had to make his mouth move. I mean, he had a really specific desire for his funeral. And that would take a lot of time to do. Even if they taxidermied and had time to work on his body, that's a lot of work. So, the 10 and a half months starts to look a little more feasible, I guess. It certainly wasn't a short period of time. And then you throw in they had to build this coffin with a mechanical crankshaft, which, by the way, when they stuck the stick in there, a big old poof of smoke came out, as though to imply this had been sitting there for a while. Like they built it, they put it together, and then there's been some distance in time. So that's interesting, right? Yet another indication that it may be that this took a while, because they had to build the entire coffin, let alone animate his corpse. Then, on top of that, they had to get all the hunters there. They had to get the invitations out. They had to all travel. They had to find a time they were all available. That takes time. And then Man-Thing had to be captured. Obviously, that was the whole point of the funeral service, and the challenge was you had to get Man-Thing. So, you add all this together, okay, I could see it taking a while. 10 and a half months still is longer than I would have thought, but, it works, right? It can work. But let's look at another possible option. What if Ulysses died on the last full moon of 2025, so of the current year instead of the previous year? Where would that land us? Well, Geek Critique, Dakota's channel, which gives, I think, great alternatives to the Disney Plus timeline, he took this to the full extent to see how would this all play out. And I think what's important to note about Geek Critique, as well as like Screen Rant and several sites, they don't necessarily lend any credence to the Disney Plus timeline. In other words, great if it works out and agrees with their timeline, so be it. But they're willing to get rid of it if it doesn't fit, which is fine, by the way. There's nothing wrong with that, taking that position. And I will note, Geek Critique does not place Thor in October 2025, so we're going to get that out of there. And you can, in my Thor video, actually, I present both of the arguments with Thor, just like I'm presenting multiple placements for Werewolf by Night in this video. All right, so let's see what we can get here. If he died on the last full moon of 2025, then the lunar calendar would place it on December 4th of 2025. If then the special was taking place 5 days before the next full moon, well, the next full moon is January 3rd of 2026. And 5 days before that would be December 29th of 2025. So that is where Geek Critique places Werewolf by Night. And that works. It will be interesting to see where the holiday special lands, because theoretically, it's going to be around Christmas time frame. And if that's true, then if they put the holiday special after Werewolf by Night, then that would maybe make it not work. But then again, as I already said, Geek Critique doesn't necessarily hold the Disney Plus timeline as canon, so it would just switch the dates around. Because again, notice Thor is placed much earlier in the timeline. All right, so does this work then? Yeah, it does. This is a very viable place to put it. Now, whereas the 10 and a half months in the earlier placement seemed like a lot, I would argue 25 days between the date of death and the special presentation date, that seems to be cutting it close, because they would have to, prepare the body. They would have to, turn it into an animatron, build the coffin, get everybody there, all the hunters, and capture the Man-Thing in 25 days. I mean, it's possible. It seems a little hard to get it all done to me, but certainly possible. And again, 10 and a half months, that's also longer than one would expect. So neither one fits perfectly. So therefore, I leave you with, there are two possible options for placement. The October 31st, which is where I'm more leaning, and then the December 29th, which, again, Geek Critique lays out. And I think what this does display is, if we take the Disney Plus timeline out of the picture, and we instead just rely on facts found within the TV shows, the movies, and the special presentations, it does allow for this flexibility. So there's nothing wrong with either of these placements. In fact, I think I'm going to do a video in the future that kind of shows what would happen if we just said, forget the Disney Plus timeline for the minute, pretend like it's just not accurate, and let's only look at the different TV shows and movies and presentations to determine the timeline. I think you're going to find that very interesting. But for now, that's it for this video. You can choose whichever you want. One of the things I really want to do with my channel is not try to tell you this is what you should think. I'll tell you what I think, sure, but you should decide these things then on your own. So if you don't mind, like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. There's lots more content you can check out. And let's all continue to enjoy the ever-expanding, ever-growing Marvel Cinematic Universe.